With the 2024 NFL Draft less than 2 weeks away, I'm putting some of my guys in the spotlight here today on Locked On NFL Scouting.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is better than this? It's a guy being a dude here on Locked On NFL Scouting. I'm Kyle Krabs, your typical co-host, solo host here today on Friday, April 12th, 2024. Want to thank you guys for making Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day, or your teams in this case. We don't just say it, we live it. Today's episode of Locked On NFL Scouting is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I'm Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, usually joined by Joe Marino. Joe has some life updates to provide the next time that he is on with us, but if you're familiar with Joe and his situation with what's going on at home, it's all good things. But Joe is unavailable to record today. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to kind of go position by position and just kind of talk about who some of my guys are for this class. Not necessarily the highest ranked guys for the 2024 NFL Draft, but guys that I would want to bet on, guys that I'm really interested in seeing how their careers play out, guys that I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on than the consensus, guys that I think are going to be successful. And I'm at a point now where I've done about 150 players, 160 players actually. We're going to finish right around 200 players. And for the work that I am doing individually, I am going to have a traditional big board that Joe and I will compare notes on. But then I'm also going to have a Dolphins-specific lens of mine that I'm going through on Locked On Dolphins. So we'll start at the quarterback position, and I think the guy that I'll shout out here, no surprise if you've been a regular listener of Locked On NFL Scouting for any period of time, but Bo Nix is kind of the guy for me that I'm really intrigued by. Spoiler, he's in my top 4 quarterbacks, so there's one of the consensus quarterbacks, at least one. I won't spoil that just yet. But one of the quarterbacks in the conversation to go in the top 10 of this year's NFL Draft that I'd rather bet on Bo Nix, particularly when you put the value proposition in when you could get Bo Nix. His growth as a player has been mind-blowing for the player that he was at Auburn to the player he is at Oregon. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he gets put into a system with structure and cohesion, and he looks the part. Now, I do think he is a little bit more of the run the scheme. I know Cam Newton, and I know we've talked about this as well on this program, but Cam Newton had lit the narrative on fire this offseason, talking about game managers versus the playmakers at the quarterback position. And I think Bo Nix, when he's at his best, is somebody who is operating within the confines of his offensive structure. The past 2 years at Oregon is the evidence of that. But at the same time, what he did at Auburn, I think has kind of forged kind of some natural ability for him outside of structure that it's never going to be consistently good, but there's enough good there and there's enough physical ability there that I think that's going to be hard for me to ignore as far as trying to project Bo Nix, and I'm fascinated to see where he lands and what opportunity he has. At the running back position, Trey Benson's my top-ranked running back. I think it's the full complement of skills with the athletic profile, with the explosiveness. I love Blake Corum. I love Jonathan Brooks. I just think Benson has a little bit more of an extra gear than both of those guys. But if I were going to circle one guy that I would want in this class, it's the instincts, the feet, the contact balance of Blake Corum is really difficult for me to ignore. And I know he ran behind the John Moore offensive line, in the best offensive line in the nation the past few years at Michigan, but I see enough with the vision and the anticipation and setting up second-level defenders that I'm really ready to buy in on Blake Corum. And even at 205 pounds, the fact that he's 5'8" gives him a lot of added leverage that I think is going to make him somebody who's difficult to find and then difficult to tackle in the hole because he does have that fluidity with his feet. So Blake Corum is probably the day two guy I'm most eager to buy in on amongst the running backs in this year's class. I know a lot of people like Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. I know a lot of people like Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. I wanted to like Wright more than I ended up liking him. And some of that, to be fair, was really just coming back to ball security. I know that's a big question mark for Jalen Wright, but that athletic profile is hard to ignore. He's a super explosive, right? But the guys who take care of the football are going to see the field with consistency. And that's been a lesson that I've had to learn through my own evaluation process as well. At wide receiver, I got wide receivers and tight ends here in the first block yet. This is such a stupid good wide receiver class. I have done a total of 19 wide receivers. And when I tell you, I've got 14 of them with day one and day two grades. There are going to be teams that are getting wide receivers in the third round of this year's class that in an average class, and maybe not average versus the past 3 years, because it feels like these wide receiver groups with the 7-on-7 culture and being able to play year round and the college rules, these pools are getting deeper and deeper and deeper. But nevertheless, in an average wide receiver class, some guys that would potentially be top 60 picks are going to be there in the middle of the third round just because of the surplus that exists here. So it's a good year to need wide receivers. I feel like I do have some guys I'm higher and lower on than consensus. I'm a little bit lower on Brian Thomas. I just finished doing Jermaine Burton's tape from Alabama. I know there's some off the field questions there. He's been in a lot of programs. He's bounced around a lot. But that's a guy, if you can get him in a good environment and keep him on the straight and narrow, he's an electric vertical receiver. I thought he had outstanding tape at Alabama this past year, and he's dense. I mean, he ran a 4.45, so it's not like he's Xavier Worthy type fast, but his ball tracking skills are really, really good. He gets really good vertical separation, the way he kind of tempos his tracking of the ball to be able to pull away from guys and create separation is very easy to like. But Ricky Pearsall, if you've been following me on Twitter at all the past week, it's become a Ricky Pearsall fan account. It's of the tier 2 wide receivers, and I've got tier 2 beyond the top 3 guys of Harrison, Neighbors, and Adunze. I've got 8 guys in tier 2, and that includes Brian Thomas and A.D. Mitchell, and it includes Ladd McConkey and Xavier Worthy and Xavier Leggett. Ricky Pearsall's the guy for me by the slimmest of margins versus some of these other guys. He's 6'1", 190, very, very explosive, wins over the middle of the field, wins in a variety of ways, has a big catch radius, showcases some toughness, can play in the slot, can play outside, super smooth. I think it's a very easy. I think some of the conversation that's had about Ladd McConkey, I think it's probably more applicable to Ricky Pearsall. I think Ladd's probably better authentically in the slot. I think Ricky's a little bit more of a diverse alignment type player. I think he's got a bigger catch radius. He's got bigger hands than Ladd McConkey is. And that'd be a guy I'd bet on. Pearsall and Leggett, for me, are the top of tier 2 for wide receivers. I'd be really eager to buy in on both of those guys, especially knowing you don't have to spend a premium to pick to get either one of them. At tight end, I like this group. Jared Wiley's got a lot of buzz right now from TCU. I did his tape yesterday. I think it's warranted. I gave him a third-round grade. He's long, plus ball skills. He's explosive. He's got really good point perimeter work as far as the strain and effort that he gives as a blocker is easy to fall in love with. He's not the best inline type player, especially when you foil him versus Theo Johnson and Ben Sinnott and Brock Bowers. There's better inline guys. And I don't even think for like Brock, I don't think inline work's one of his authentic best values versus Sinnott. I think is probably the best inline guy. Him and Cade Stover are the two that really pop the most out of the guys that I've done so far. I know Tip Ryman from Illinois is a late round guy who hasn't had a lot of opportunity as a pass catcher, but has a good athletic profile. But Wiley really I was really pleasantly surprised, and I'd watched some TCU games throughout the course of the season last year. I watched the big Colorado game. He had the one-handed touchdown catch in that game. But that's somebody who, it's not just linear athleticism, but it's kind of like the three-dimensional plane. He's got some slipperiness to him, his ability to kind of force you to miss, and he moves and he accelerates really, really well. So I like Jared Wiley a ton. I'm a little bit lower on Jatavian Sanders just because I think the athletic profile for a receiving tight end is has enough holes that you can poke in it where you have some questions, and then just the blocking element of his game is not a strength in any capacity. Wiley's not an inline guy either, but he has success blocking on the perimeter on screen games and RPOs and outside run with motion where they'll run him across the set and try and get him to pick up the nickel and get attached for outside run concepts. And he can get attached in those areas where Jatavian Sanders, I didn't see any consistency at all with that. But I know my hot take here is Theo Johnson. I have a second round grade on. I also have a 2 on Ben Sinnott. So kind of my pecking orders, Bowers, and then I got Sinnott and Theo Johnson, and then Jared Wiley's the top of the third tier. Really like that group. That is the skill group. Now we're going to come back and get into the trenches, the big uglies, next here on Locked On NFL Scouting. So make sure that you stick with us. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships, but it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home the dub. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. Let's talk trenches, right? Everybody knows the game's won in the trenches. Offensive tackles is where we will start here, and the professed love for Troy Fautanu that I have extends well beyond just the fact that I evaluated him specifically and first and foremost through the lens of searching for a fit for the Miami Dolphins. I think he is just super athletic. I think what he does in the run scheme, I think what he does in space, I think the aggressiveness and the assertiveness and how he likes to get his hands on people really quickly in his sets, it's very easy to like. Obviously, I've gone out on a limb the past 2 weeks and said I think Joe Alt's my highest graded offensive player in the class, which obviously speaks to what I think he's capable of being. But I want to give a little bit of love to Blake Fisher from Notre Dame, and I know a good friend of mine who I've known in the industry for quite some time, John Owning, has recently come out. I saw him. He had a few tweets talking about Blake Fisher and how he thought he was better than some of the middle day two conversation offensive tackles. And I'm probably inclined to agree. I think he's a very high floor player. He doesn't have the athletic ceiling of, say, a Amarius Mims or a Olufashanu. He's not that kind of player. And when you're contrasting and watching him on a snap-by-snap basis and Joe Alt's the dude on the other side, it certainly does force you to really slow down and watch him in a vacuum and try to appreciate what he does. I just think he's a very clean player. I don't think he's a guy who's going to hang his hat on any individual trait. But at the same time, for the offensive line, I don't think it's a coincidence that that entire unit is the one where the sum of the parts is not as important as the sum of the whole, right? And being cohesive within what is around you is more important than your individual ability with length and punch timing. And you got to see stuff the same way. And I think for that Notre Dame offensive line, which continues to be one of the best in the country as well, Fisher and his experiences is really easy to like. On the interior, you've got no shortage of options, man. I really like the top probably 6-7 names in this year's class. I don't know how early some of these guys will go. I do have Graham Barton graded as an interior player. I know he played tackle. I think Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, I think his ceiling's higher at on the inside versus tackle. I know he's probably going to get drafted to play tackle, and I'd get why. But Christian Haynes, Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier, Zach Zinter, Cooper Beebe. I'm doing Dominic Pooney from Kansas right now, Christian Mahogany from Boston College. If I had to kind of go out and say this is the guy I really like, Christian Haynes is the guy I've kind of been championing over on Locked On Dolphins for quite some time. But again, that's kind of through the lens of that specific system, which is the wide zone and the zone, outside zone blocking schemes. His ability to climb and get movement and flow horizontally is all really, really good. But I came away and I really liked what I saw from Zach Zinter from Michigan. I think he's probably somebody who's a little under the radar because he had the season-ending injury this past season, but played at Michigan. So how under the radar can you really be? But as a potential late day two target, if you need somebody in the third round and you strike out on Powers Johnson or you strike out on Cooper Beebe, come back, you get Zach Zinter. I think that's a player who you'd feel really good about so long as the medicals come back and check in where they need to for him. On the edge, this has become a Mohamed Kamara fan account as well. I've mentioned his name a few times on the show in the past week, but Austin Booker I like as well. As far as day two options, I think the drop-off is pretty severe after the first 3-4 guys. But Kamara and Booker are the two day two targets that I would draft in the third. I've got third round grades on both of those guys for very different reasons. And depending on what you need, you might draft a different one. Kamara, I think, is much better with power. Booker's pretty fluid. I think Kamara is a little bit more explosive. Booker's longer. So there's contrasting strengths with both of those guys that if you care about length, you probably go Austin Booker. If you care about speed to power and collapsing the pocket, but winning with authentic speed, I think Kamara is the guy that you would go to as well. The all-around guy, Jonah Ellis, I think has some Andrew Van Ginkel, who just got 2 for 20 from Minnesota and had a really nice year as a rotational pass rush type who could theoretically and is athletically good enough to play off the ball. But I won't make the same mistake I made with Andrew Van Ginkel, who was a JUCO kid who went to Wisconsin and was kind of underdeveloped. I think Ellis is a little bit further ahead as far as what he has in his pass rush bag right now than what Van Ginkel did when he came out and was a 5th round pick in 2019. But I won't fade that player quite so hard, even though it's like, well, I wish he was bigger. I wish he was longer. I wish he had more power element to his game. A guy who's that fluid and dynamic and has kind of the pass rush counters that he has, but is athletic enough to play in space, is probably going to get some kind of opportunity to stick somewhere, and I wouldn't bet against it. On the defensive interior, last spot here, Michael Hall is one of my guys. I really, really like what Michael Hall brings to the table as far as a pass rush player. You know, all this conversation about Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton as two really electric, disruptive players at the top of the class. Hall's my third interior defensive lineman, like in front of Dorless, in front of Chris Jenkins, in front of Fisk, in front of Mason Smith. And some of it's like Hall's long, that he's explosive. I know Fisk, the whole selling point with Braden Fisk is he's explosive. Maybe just kind of getting into scratching the surface when you consider he played at Western Michigan and then transferred to Florida State. So I get it. But when you marry the traits with it, Hall's a player that's a lot easier for me to buy into. And then Brandon Dorless and Rook Ororho are in the same tier as him, as Michael Hall. But Hall's the one I think has the most consistency with showing pass rush plan, but also having length and showing leverage. I wish Dorless played a little lower. Hall for me is the one who you acknowledge there's going to be instances where you maybe get pushed around if you're going against run-heavy teams that run inside and run duo and run power and are going to run angles and down blocks at you and try and wash you out. I acknowledge all that, but the total body work for Michael Hall is the one for me that I'm ready the most to buy in on for the tier 2 or lower interior defensive linemen. Now we have linebackers and secondary up next to close this episode of Locked On NFL Scouting. Stick with us. I found this on the web. Siri, I didn't ask you for that. Thank you, though. Linebackers is the position I think I have the most issues with, just kind of reconciling who's available. Peyton Wilson's one of my favorite players in the class, but the injury history there is kind of hard to ignore. I know some people really like Junior Colson. I'm ready to buy in on Junior Colson to a certain degree. I think he has more growth that's necessary in just kind of the consistency of his keys and run stopping ability and making sure he's in the right position. Where I think Jeremiah Trotter, I wish I could blend Jeremiah Trotter and Junior Colson together into one player. Some people also really like Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M. It's a player I see the appeal. He's long. He's got good sideline to sideline range. Really good ability to kind of flip the switch and hit you with a lot of power with his pads. But he's not somebody who I was really impressed with how he stacks the line of scrimmage, stacks blocks. I think he's better when he's in pass rush situations as compared to playing backwards and playing in zone coverage. Felt a little Jamin Davis-y to me, so like maybe that gets you drafted in a certain stratosphere. But I'm going to be honest, other than Peyton Wilson, but you acknowledge the injury history there, I don't think there's any guys at linebacker that I would classify or quantify as being my guys. No surprise for you to find out that Mike Sandersill from the nickel from Michigan is one of my guys in this year's class. At the cornerback position, his resume and instinct for a player who is still kind of new to playing, he used to be a wide receiver, is enough for me to really, really get excited about. I do wish he was a little bigger. But at the same time, I think the instincts that he shows at this young stage of his career is enough for me to really, really want to buy in on. I also liked Andrew Phillips from Kentucky. I watched him recently as well. I think the fluidity for him is what really stands out for some of these other guys. And he's not the biggest corner, but for some of the guys that are kind of considered the top players, the transitional quickness in space and fluidity is one of the questions that you have. I don't really have that with Andrew Phillips. And that's somebody who I would say is from a day 2 perspective, I'd be ready to buy in on as well. Safety is kind of in the same boat as linebacker when you consider I've done Tyler Nubin, I've done Jaden Hicks, I've done Cole Bishop, I've done Cooper DeJean, I've done Kalen Bullock, I've done Tyke Smith and Bo Braid. I guess Cole Bishop's my guy here. The tackling is a concern, but I really like everything else he brings to the table. The range, he's out hustling his teammates from the backside to run down outside runs. He is capable of tackling. He's capable of showcasing some hitting power. He's not a true high safety player. Like, don't leave him at free safety and run a bunch of cover 3 and expect him to cut routes across his face in the middle of the field with a lot of consistency or be a ball hawk in that area. But I think as you want your safeties playing forward a little bit more, playing from depth and playing forward in the way the game is going right now, I do think Cole Bishop is somebody who I would put my flag on in day 2, and I would draft him on day 2. I know a lot of the simulators kind of have him on the fence. So those are my guys. At least at this stage, there's still some guys I need to get to. Obviously, I've got a busy week and a half ahead of me to make sure I get everybody done and lined up before the draft. But those are the guys right now, not necessarily the top guys, but guys that I'm really invested in, I think could be really successful And I'll be really fired up for them if they go to a spot that's going to put them in position to be successful. That is going to do it for us here on Locked on NFL Scouting. I hope you guys enjoyed this solo jaunt through my personal rankings and my personal perspective on some of the well-known but not consensus top players of the 2024 NFL Draft, which is a good one. We will be back again on Monday. I would expect Joe will be with us on Monday. He can let you guys know what's going on with him. Again, it's all good things, but he's got other stuff to tend to right now that is not recording a podcast on a Friday. So make it a great weekend. We will be back to talk to you all again on Monday. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Take care.